Welcome to the 28th episode of the series Decolonizing the Mind. And the sub-series, we are in the third one with Brother Imam Muhammad al-Asi, who is an expert on the Quran, has published 15 volumes and has written 45 volumes on explaining each of the verses of the Quran. So I'm very happy he's back again. Um, so last time after we finished on gender and sexuality, I went on thinking about some of the things you did, and something just came in my mind, and I struggled with it, and I said, let's put it forward to you. That is this. Uh, I looked at the case in Iran where a transgender person was born as a male, wanted a gender operation. Finally, he got in contact with Ayatollah Khomeini, and it was accepted, and the fatwa was announced, making it legal. And as far as I could see, is that the argument was that male and female organs were hidden, so that the female and male organs, the nature of the person was hidden, basically an aberration of nature that humans could use and say, you could correct that. Now, my point was this. I saw that as a way to how a imam, a religious leader, react to people's concerns about, in this case, about sexuality and how they deal with it. I wonder this. Suppose you are imam, a mother comes to you, says, my son is gay. I love my son, raise him, and the Quran says, that is a disease. My son says, no, it's nature, it's not a disease. What should I do as a Muslim mother? Should I disavow my son? Should I say it's a disease, and therefore I condemn it and I can't love you anymore? What would you, as a religious leader, tell the mother?
You want a short answer or you want an expanded answer?
Give me the short answer first.
The short answer, I would tell the mother, continue with all your heart loving your son and continue with all of your common sense and all of your, let's say, uh, human nature to assault his sin.
To assault his
Sin,
thin? Oh,
sin.
sin, yes.
S
S-I-N.
Yeah, because the a man-to-man sexual relationship and a woman-to-woman sexual relationship is a sin. So
Right.
that sin is not to be confused with the son. She'll love the son and hate the sin. That's the
What
short.
does it mean practically?
Well, what does it mean practically? She's a mother. Whether it's a mother or father, I mean,
Yeah, yeah.
whatever the case is, that's their own son. And even when a son, or it could be a case of a girl, a daughter, even when they have this, and I mentioned this in the presentation when we were talking about sexuality, that there has not been enough information, scientific, a hard fact information concerning this aberration in human nature. They do. There's some types of arguments that some very educated persons present that there is some validity to a person having sexual relations with his own type, with his own sexual counterpart. And I don't know, if you've seen it or your viewers or listeners seen, there's there's a type of it's not exactly a documentary, but it's a person who had the same questions floating in his mind, and he went around asking people about this whole subject. He asked the primitive people, he asked the most educated people, he asked both sexes, he went to different areas of it was here in the United States. He even flew to Africa to ask questions about this, and it's titled "Who is a Woman?" I strongly suggest, and this person is not a Muslim. I From watching it, I get the impression he is, to a certain degree, a practicing Christian, but it's not very clear or anything. He pursued this subject very objectively. And the bottom line is, when you listen to these, whether they are physicians, whether they are professors at universities, or whether they are politicians, he went to these categories and he asked them about this question. And when you listen to their answers, and one of them, I think it was the politician, he said, I want this interview I want this interview to end. I don't want to pursue any more answers to the questions that you are posing, which means that once again, to try to prove my point, that this issue of trying to provide some scientific rationale for this aberration in human nature, for this deviation in human nature, is simply not there. And so I go back to a portion of your question, and that is, as an Islamic alim or scholar, if someone comes up to me and provides me, as you mentioned, the case in the Islamic Republic of Iran, there was some type of, let's say, basis for having a transsexual medical procedure because there was some latent organs that did not belong to the body that they were in, or something like that. So, you know, it happens. These are, except if it's, I don't doubt that. I'm not trying to argue that this didn't take place, but when it takes place, whether it's in the Islamic Republic of Iran or whether it's in some other country in the world, these are to be considered, and I think statistics would bear me out. These are to be considered the exception to human nature. They are not human nature, and we have exceptions to human nature. We have people, let's say, or individuals being born with one eye. In the aftermath of the war in Iraq, with the use of, the type of experimental technology, the depleted uranium and all of this, there was horrendous the types of births, babies coming out with no limbs, or babies coming out with only one eye, or babies. There's so many disfigurations that go on. But these are, as I said, this is not human nature in its main course. These tend to be the way out exceptions that have to be dealt with on an individual basis and not to
Okay.
be mainstreamed.
Yeah. So I understand your point. You're saying what the mother needs to do, the child says it's not deviation of nature. It is, it's my nature itself. It's not a disease. The mother says, the Quran says it's a disease, and you're saying as an advice to the parent, love your son, fight the sin. That is
More or
in a
less.
short, right? That is
Exactly.
in a short, the thing.
But the critical point here is, in objecting to the sin, you don't turn hostile.
You
This
don't
is
turn what?
hostile.
Oh, hostile. All right, right.
Yeah. This is an
This is important.
yes. It has to be drilled in, because some people they will carry this sentence and they'll say, "Oh, then the mother and the father, they have to begin fighting with their son and all." There's no
Right.
fight in this. It's
Okay,
just a
okay.
matter of
But that's an important addition.
rehabilitation. It's a process of therapeutic rehabilitation, which will take time.
Okay,
And
this the son
the
might not agree with that. But
well,
what happened? What happened if the if do you think that people, because this is for a parent a very difficult decision. It's very emotional how to deal with this. Um, do you are you not afraid that if for the gay community there are ample evidence that it's not a deviation, not a disease, it's part of nature, that parents who are in this situation, uh, if they don't find an answer sufficient in religion, that they turn away from religion?
well, number one, religion is a broad word. I mean, you can
Yeah,
consider
it's the Quran, Christian. I mean, Christians and Judaism, they have the same kind of problems, right? It's not a specific Islamic thing.
correct. Yes, yeah, exactly. You're right. It's in the scriptures of the three major, let's say, scriptural revelations from God Almighty. And as I said, and maybe it's worth reiterating, and that is that when these types of I would not argue with a person who says I'm attracted to the same sex. I would I don't I would not say he's lying to me or she's lying to me or whatever. I would not. I would say yes, this I'm sorry that this is happening. I'm sorry that that's the case with you, but something has to be done about this. And you see, the human being, our human nature is extremely complex, extremely complex. And the only insight we have to a holistic approach to our human nature comes from He who created us. The infinite knowledge and the infinite power that created us knows our human nature. So it's the only remedy that can come to such a off course direction in life can only come from the Creator. And there's nothing that can surmount love and affection in this human nature that we have. Nothing can surmount that. That's the most potent force that exists. And if it is handled the way it should be handled in the relationship between parents and children, when one child or some children they go the wrong way, if the parents are genuinely and deeply in a caring relationship with their offspring, that relationship will overcome this type of you know misguidance in life. It
Mm.
will overcome that. We can't wait until science, because as I said, I gave you last time, I gave the examples of those who live in a promiscuous society such as is exemplified in Hollywood, and those who live in a society in which a man and a woman actually don't see each other even after they are married. They don't. And these types of aberrations in human nature begin to express themselves in these types of abnormal societies. So it's an abnormal social phenomenon that generated for us an abnormal individual. And to deal with this, you can't deal with one and forget the other. We're
Okay.
holistic.
All
That's
right.
why, I don't know,
Good.
maybe I'm,
No,
I'm
no,
being,
okay. No, it's good. It's good to. I mean, I think about the things you're saying. It's not business as usual for me. Oh, we have an interview and that's it. So I reflect on it. So for today, I'm curious about what the Quran says about how Muslims and non-Muslims is another issue. We'll talk about it later. How Muslims should set up the political institutions of their society. Does the Quran give specific guidelines about this?
The Quran plus the Prophet who explained the Quran in practical terms, but the Quran as a reference gives highlights or gives a general direction of how to set up an Islamic social order. That social order obviously needs a governing body.
Yes, yes.
And in the Quran, there are instructions as to how to go about generating that foundation, which is the governing body. The foundation eventually becomes the governing body, and the governing body regenerates itself in the coming generations. And this would take us back to early Islamic history, and there, the guidelines, the general guidelines are in the Quran. The application of those general guidelines have gone through trial and error after the first generation of Islamic rulership. And that's why you have in Islam, there are those who are quote unquote Sunnis and those who are quote unquote Shi'is. And if you
And
trace,
what is the difference in terms of political order between these two schools of thought?
good question. The difference basically is, it gets a little complicated, but I'm reducing it to its basics. The difference is that when the Prophet Muhammad, may Allah's peace and blessings be upon him and his, when he was present in the society that he was in Al-Madinah, in what is called today Arabia, there was no Sunni Shiite thing. Everyone acceded, this is our prophet, hence he is our statesman, therefore he is our leader. Finished. Now, the prophet passes away, and when the prophet passes away, those who were his, let's say, I don't want to use the word, but just to facilitate communication, those who were his closest companions or his quote unquote inner circle, those who understood him the most, differed as to who should succeed him in the position of leading the Islamic society. One opinion said those who should succeed him are those who are descendants from him, qualified descendants from him, called imams. And therefore, this is how the Islamic society or the Islamic state has its leadership. So the first leader after the prophet had to be his son-in-law. The prophet didn't have any sons, for those who lack the information. And so his son-in-law, who was married to the prophet's daughter, and at the same time was the prophet's cousin, was the leader of the Muslims. And there are many statements attributed to the prophet that vouch for this type of understanding. The other opinion, those who call themselves Sunnis, after the prophet passed away, they say the leadership of the Muslims has to be decided by the Muslims themselves, especially the inner circle, those who were closest to the prophet. They will decide who the leader is going to be.
Is decision an election then? Is
Yes,
decision, is it an
exactly.
election or is it a common ground until everybody agrees?
It 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 you can look at it as an election because an election actually took place. The 4 rulers after the Prophet were elected. The fourth one being the Shia appointee, or the Shia belief that he was supposed to be the first one. So instead of being the first one, he became the fourth one.
Right.
And that interference was because in the Quran, there's a verse that says, وَأَمْرُهُمْ شُورَى بَيْنَهُم, which means their, Their, and this pertains to the committed Muslims. The committed Muslims' public affair, public decision is a matter of public deliberations and consultations. This opens the door for having committees, for having caucuses, for having electors to decide who's going to lead this Islamic social community. So that's basically, and I ran over a lot of details. Yeah, but that's basically the beginning of the what some people call the split between Sunnis and Shiites. Sunnis think that, and there's much that proves their opinion, that the leader has to have the consent of the public, of the populace, if you will.
That sounds democratic.
Yeah, it sounds. And meanwhile, the Shiites say, no, what if the public is relatively ignorant and they choose a leader who is not qualified to lead? A preference is given to qualifications over the public consensus. So
Okay.
that's
All right. Let me put something on the table. Iran, for example, Iran is a Shia country, right?
correct.
Okay. So um, there is a elected president and there's a religious leader. So in some way, there are two different institutions in the political system, right? That was not the case in the early imamates of the early history of Shiaism, right? Um, is this how do they make it compatible with the history?
Okay. The answer to your question depends on the word they in your question. How do they make it compatible? If you mean by they the rulers is one thing. If you mean by they the ruled, that's another thing, because these are two different areas here. So this is what happened in the understanding among Shiites of their own history. Islamic rulership, Islamic governance was suspended after the 11th Imam or the 12th Imam, who right now is in occultation. According to Shia belief, he is alive on earth somewhere to reappear in the future sometime. And he disappeared in the 2nd century of Islam, which is about 1200 years ago. He disappeared. And since that time, as far as Islamic governance and leadership is concerned, the Muslims have no legitimate leader who can lead them.
I understand. I understand.
Islamically
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
legitimate leader who can lead them. So this is the popular belief. This is the belief of
Mhm.
the average person, and it's been a tradition, and they've inherited this type of call it culture or background. The departure from this was Imam Khomeini. Imam Khomeini said, I mean, I'm not quoting him, obviously, but in effect, he said, how can we suspend all of these morals, values, laws, directives, instructions that we have from God? How can we suspend them for all this time and explain to ourselves that, oh God, you revealed these things to us, but we can't discharge our responsibilities until you send us, or until the advent of the 12th Imam arrives. He said, this is not what the Quran says. This is not what the Prophet says. So there was a break inside the Shiite context between the traditionalists, who are still waiting, and they are in their tens of millions. They are still waiting for the appearance of the 12th Imam to become the legitimate leader of the Muslims and potentially of the world, as opposed to the revolutionary impulse of Imam Khomeini, who said, no, it's true that we wait for the 12th Imam, but we don't wait for him as spectators and sidelined in the world. We wait for him through our activism, our involvement in issues of justice and equality. That's how we do it. And this
Uh-huh.
what I just explained is still there, but it's under wraps.
All right.
It's not really out in the open.
So going now to the Sunni tradition. Um, so look, the Catholic Church has a pope, and they select the pope, and there's a head of the church. In the Sunni, there's not one leader of let's say the religious community. Or is it? Am I wrong? How do they view the leadership nowadays, and electing the leadership, or how are the procedures and and institutions of that in the Sunni tradition?
Yeah, in the Sunni world, um, an average Sunni would consider all the heads of state illegitimate. So the rulers in these 55 plus nation states, as far as a normal Sunni is concerned, all of them don't have any legitimacy, whether they are kings or presidents or whatever title they have. They are not legitimate. So what corner does a Sunni go to find legitimacy? Here is where Sunnis place their expectations on Islamic movements in the world, the activist Muslims who have a vision of doing away with the current ruling classes in all the Muslim world, with the possible, I'm speaking here in the context of our moment. If you were asking me this question 20 years ago, the answer would have been different. If you're going to ask me this question 20 years from now, I'm sure the answer is going to be a little different.
Mhm.
But in the context, in the time frame that we are in right now, the Sunnis, and this is not all of them, obviously, but a very sizable quantity, number of them, would consider that the Islamic Republic in Iran certainly has an Islamic orientation. Some of them agree with it, some of them partially agree with it, and some of them are critical of it, but they still say this is the first sincere attempt to live Islam in its full meaning, from the internal feelings of a person all the way up to administering state affairs. Iran is, And then some of them will throw in two other areas in the Muslim world that they can construct an argument for it, and some of them do, and those are Turkey and Malaysia. Those are two areas in which they say these types will tell you that they are trying to bring about an Islamic way of life in its totality. They go about doing it in their own ways, but we can't lump them in. You can't say like Turkey or Malaysia, and some would even throw in there Qatar. You can't say that these are equivalent to Morocco or Egypt or Saudi Arabia or these other places where Islam is obviously just a matter of rituals and has nothing to do with administration and the public affairs. So the Sunnis right now, even though in their belief, the Sunnis in their eschatology, they say that they are awaiting the advent of the Mahdi, the same way the Shi'is are awaiting his reappearance. The Sunnis are waiting for his appearance. The Shi'is are awaiting for his reappearance because they have a different definition of who al-Mahdi is, even though they agree that, we're waiting for him. In addition to that, the Shi'is are anticipating the re-emergence of al-Mahdi more strongly than the Sunnis. The Shi'is also have a belief they share with the Sunnis that Jesus is going to come back to earth, to the world, to humanity. The Sunnis also have that same thing, but the Sunnis emphasize more on Jesus than they do on the Mahdi. The Shi'is emphasize on the Mahdi more than they do on Jesus, but both of them are within the scope of anticipation.
Okay. Uh, in the West, eventually, there's a political system where church is separated from the state, and in many um, Islamic country, let's say even Turkey or even Malaysia or so, they have elections for political leaders, right? Erdogan is a political leader, is not a religious leader, right? So how in those countries and how I suppose according to the Iran, there's no separation of politics from running, let's say, administrating a community, governing a community in political institutions is not separate from the religious leadership. The religious leadership also administers. But how in a country like Turkey, who is the spiritual leader then? Who do people look up to say, oh, here is the guidance for look in Iran you could say, oh, they have this institution of the supreme leader and all this. Where is it with the Sunnis?
With the Sunnis, they both Sunnis and Shias don't separate the religious from the political. Both, they don't do that. In theory and in thought, there's no separation. When it comes to practice, the only place that you have a combination of what is called religious figures with political figures, the only place where you have that in practice is the Islamic Republic of Iran. Now, when you come to places like Turkey, or you come to places like Qatar or Malaysia, or you can even throw in Afghanistan for that matter, when you come to places like that, the issue is not on persons. Like, the Catholics, they have a pope, and maybe in some people's minds, other religions have similar figures or figureheads. But when it comes to the Sunni context, it's not in the person himself, it's in the party that he belongs to. The party itself is the representation of the amalgamation of what is religious with what is political. So Erdogan, he belongs to the Rifah party, to what used to be the Rifah party, the AK party. So that party itself is the embodiment of religion and politics. The same thing, like let's take, in Malaysia with a very watered down version, Anwar Ibrahim and his party, they have the same components similar to that, the difference of, the details in all of this, but the similarity is they are trying their best to mesh what is political with what is religious. In other words, to begin with, there's no in the Islamic mind, there's no separation between what is political and what is religious, because it goes back to a simple thing. You can't separate what is moral from what is legal. You begin with what is moral, and what is moral extends to become what is legal. The same thing, this same frame of mind, you can place it in what is called religion and politics. Things begin as religion, but they flourish as politics, clean politics, because many times when people say politics, they begin to think about crooks and, these types of figures that we have in the world today. But in an Islamic working order, that would not exist. A person who is leading society is a combination of what is called politics and religion.
Okay, in the next 20 minutes, I want to do three questions. One is this. The world, 7, 8 billion people, consists of 2 million Muslims, 2 billion Muslims, and the rest. Is there any way that within the Quran there was some fissioning of the world in a Muslim and a non-Muslim world? Is it that the whole world will be Islamic?
Okay, we go back to the basics. Number one, and this is part of the colonization of the contemporary mind. When someone says Islam or Islamic, it is understood the way Europeans and American powers understand Islam to be. So Islam becomes a religion just like other religions, and Islam is not a religion just like other religions. The word Islam itself means to acquiesce to the will of God. That's simply what it doesn't mean some religion. The other details that are included in this Islam are the movements and the functions of acquiescing to God. So if we take this broad understanding, we unshackle it from the theological constraints of Euro-American lexicon. If we think about, people as those who acquiesce or who yield to God, the one creator, then we consider them to be Muslims.
So, say Chinese. The Chinese have no conception of, let's say, God. They have conception of ethics and how, but not of supernatural beings or metaphysical beings. How would a Muslim view the Chinese as being, submitting to Allah?
Well, the Muslims would consider that type of belief to be wrong. I mean, simply speaking, that type of belief as a belief is wrong. But the person who has that type of belief, even though, quote unquote, theologically, he or she is not right, But in the works of his life, does he harm anyone? Because not harming anyone is a demonstration of yielding to God. Does that person help others when others need help? If that person does that, that's another demonstration of yielding to God. So you begin to, and you can take this on and on. So you
Then
begin,
everybody in the world is a Muslim.
well,
Who- who-
potentially, everyone in the world is a potential Muslim, or everyone in the world, not everyone, but most of the people in the world are Muslims, but they don't know that they are Muslims.
Okay.
You see?
Okay,
And
let's
this,
let's put it also in a different way. The other question. If now in an Islamic society there are people saying, I don't believe in God, I'm an atheist. How does an Islamic society deal with those people?
in an Islamic society, per the standards of the Quran and the Prophet, they are guaranteed freedom of conviction, freedom of belief, freedom of thought. There's an
An
ayah,
atheist. An
an ayah,
atheist.
of course. In the Quran says, وَقُلِ الْحَقُّ مِنْ رَبِّكُمْ فَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيُؤْمِنْ وَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيَكْفُرْ. This means, and say, O Prophet, declare to the public, to the world, truth and justice comes to you from your sustainer. Thus, whoever wants to commit to that truth and justice has the freedom to do so. And whoever wants to take issue with that truth and justice has the right to do so. But taking issue with it theoretically, academically, intellectually, philosophically, they have all the freedom to do that. But if they want to turn that type of whatever philosophy, whatever ideology, whatever, if they want to turn that into oppression, into inequality, no, they don't have the freedom to do that.
Okay, so you're saying in an Islamic society, atheists have the freedom of expression.
Of course, of
Okay,
course.
all right. Now here, many Muslims living in the West, it surprises me by the way, but many Muslims in the West, right, are a minority, right? Britain, Holland, UK, USA, and so. Now, the Quran deals with an Islamic society and guidelines of how Muslims should set up their society. But the Quran didn't envision Muslims being a minority in a non-Muslim state. So, how do Muslims who are in a non-Muslim state, living in a non-Muslim state, um, how should they uh, uh, conduct themselves? Should they say, no, we are now a minority, but we strive to become a majority, or we accept the legal system and we abide by it? What are the rules a Muslim minority should live by according to the Quran? And is if the Quran ever foresee a situation like this?
Okay, the way you ask the question is the way a colonial person would ask the question.
Okay.
Of course, you're playing the devil's advocate because this
Yeah.
is what it's all about. But remember, I said Islam, the meaning of Islam is yielding to God. So when a person who is a Muslim who understands this leaves his own quote unquote majority society and country and goes to another society and country, and he looks at the people around, he disagrees with them as far as theology is concerned. Of course, he's not going to go to the synagogue or the church or the temple or whatever. He won't go there. So there's a theological distance here. But as far as interaction is concerned, if a Muslim realizes around him people are submitting to God without them intellectually understanding that they are submitting to God, then he's among his own types.
Okay. That isn't. that is completely in coordination with what you said earlier.
Right.
That Islam is not about a political conception of a unity to which you belong, but the submission to God.
No,
The,
there's no contradiction between the two. There's no
yes.
contradiction. So you can have an Islamic order, an Islamic society in fourth gear or fifth gear, and you can have an Islamic resemblance of what the society should be like in the form of people. Yeah, you can take I can take a lot of examples here in the United States. We have different types of very religious Christians, like the Amish, uh,
Hmm.
and there's different types
Yes.
like that. And if you go and you observe their life, the only thing you find out, I mean, everything that they are doing is uh, surrendering their effort, their daily effort. They're surrendering it to God, their Creator. Except the notion of God having a child or these things, it's just that they have that wrong. That's the only, and it's European history that put a distance between Christianity and Islam. It's that colonialist, imperialist, one world order emanating from Euro America that has placed a distance between those who say they are Christians and those who say that they are Muslims. During the Crusades, when the European forces came to the Holy Land, they killed Christians the same way they were killing Muslims. These were supposed to be sent by the Pope. These were supposed to be Christians. So why are you killing Christians? They'll tell you, oh, because these Christians who live in Palestine and in the Levant and all these are cultural Muslims. You
I
see
see.
how the distance between Muslims and Christians was very narrow. And when the European understanding of Christianity came along, how they put all of this distance to the extent of, genocidal policies that we are
Okay.
witnessing with our
Good.
eyes.
Well, thank you for this. I really enjoyed your explanation of the political theory of Islam, its history and its political history, and also the way you look at it. Next time, I want to discuss Islamic economic theory. So I look forward to that and really appreciate your contribution to this series. And
Okay.
have a good day. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll see the audience next week.
Okay.